Donald Trump is killing, thousands of Americans by giving them duff advice, and his macho, I'm all right, look at me, I've survived COVID, is an absolute buffoon. He has no place in the White House. He's an embarrassment, and he should be ashamed of himself, especially when thousands of Americans have died. COVID is a serious disease. It's a serious pandemic. People have died, loved ones have died, and he's an absolute disgrace. And so is Boris Johnson for not being able to even know his own rules.
Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of the UK Labour Party, found herself embroiled in a political controversy after making a series of pointed and harsh remarks about former US President Donald Trump. In an interview, Rayner referred to Trump as macho and sharply criticized his leadership, accusing him of recklessly handling the COVID-19 pandemic, which had led to the loss of thousands of American lives. These remarks were particularly biting, and it didn't take long for them to strike a nerve with Trump, who has spent his political career cultivating an image as an outspoken and unapologetic figure. For Trump, such criticisms were more than mere insults. They were an invitation to respond, and, true to form, he didn't hesitate to retaliate with equal fervor. Trump's response was swift and cutting. He publicly mocked Rayner, dismissing her comments as foolish and questioning her competence, even suggesting that she needed to look in a mirror and reassess her actions. For Trump, it was more than a political disagreement. It was a personal affront, one he was determined to strike back against. His reaction escalated the situation beyond a simple exchange of words, igniting a much larger diplomatic and political storm between the UK Labour Party and the United States. What followed was not just another verbal clash, but a full-fledged diplomatic crisis with far-reaching consequences. Trump used his influence over US trade policies to implement a series of punitive tariffs aimed at the UK, specifically targeting key industries like steel and aluminium, both critical to the UK economy. These tariffs had an immediate and profound impact, raising production costs in sectors that were already under pressure. For industries like manufacturing, which relied heavily on steel and aluminum, the tariffs presented a significant financial challenge. The higher costs inevitably trickled down to consumers, further exacerbating the financial difficulties many Britons were already facing. This episode revealed the fragility of international relationships and how quickly personal disputes could lead to real-world consequences. Rayner's comments, while intended as a political statement, set off a chain of events that resulted in the UK being caught in the crossfire of a trade dispute. The Labour Party, already facing internal challenges, found itself under even greater pressure as it tried to navigate the aftermath of Rayner's comments and Trump's retaliatory actions. The fallout from this exchange wasn't just political. It had serious economic implications, affecting industries, businesses, and workers in the UK. As tensions escalated, the consequences of Rayner's words rippled through the UK's global standing and its economic stability. The incident underscored the delicate balance that political leaders must maintain in international relations, reminding them of the potential costs of political missteps. The Labour Party, already struggling with its image, now faced the additional challenge of managing the fallout from a diplomatic incident that could damage its credibility both at home and abroad. The road ahead was uncertain, with the UK's political and economic stability now tangled in the consequences of a high-stakes verbal clash. The backlash from Angela Rayner's comments about Donald Trump quickly spiraled beyond a mere exchange of words, turning into significant economic consequences for the UK. Trump, known for never backing down from a confrontation, responded by imposing a series of retaliatory tariffs on key UK industries, notably steel and aluminium, sectors central to the country's manufacturing and export economy. These tariffs were a direct retaliation for Rayner's harsh criticism, and they immediately strained British businesses. For industries already reeling under rising costs and supply chain disruptions, the new tariffs only worsened their financial struggles. The result was a sharp increase in the cost of goods, especially in manufacturing, where steel and aluminium are essential to production. For manufacturers, rising production costs were inevitable, and these increases trickled down to consumers, leading to higher prices for everyday products. The timing of the tariffs made them even more damaging, as the UK was already facing the economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic and the complications of adjusting to a post-Brexit world. Many UK businesses, particularly in manufacturing, found themselves caught in the crossfire between political tensions and harsh economic realities. For workers in these industries, the tariffs meant increased job insecurity and stagnant wages, further compounding the financial pressures they were already enduring. The ripple effect spread throughout the economy as businesses, forced to absorb rising production costs, passed on those costs to consumers. This resulted in inflation and a higher cost of living for ordinary Britons, further stretching already strained household budgets. Beyond the immediate economic impact, the tariffs highlighted the fragile nature of international trade relations. For the UK, the imposition of these tariffs underscored how quickly political disputes could escalate into full-blown diplomatic and economic crises. The Labour Party, under Keir Starmer's leadership, now found itself in a challenging position, trying to manage the fallout from Rayner's remarks while also attempting to mend the strained relationship with the US. Starmer was faced not only with the domestic political fallout, but also with the broader implications for the UK's economic and diplomatic standing in the global arena. The trade tariffs served as a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of global economies and the far-reaching consequences that political rhetoric can have. As the UK struggled to mitigate the economic impact of the tariffs, questions arose about how Labour would handle future trade negotiations, particularly with the US. The incident exposed the vulnerabilities in international relations and the potential dangers of unchecked political statements. For the UK, it was a cautionary tale. Diplomacy, even in times of tension, must be handled carefully, especially with a powerful global actor like the US. The economic fallout from Rayner's words was a clear demonstration that political missteps could quickly snowball into larger crises, with profound consequences for businesses, workers, and the broader economy. The political tension between the UK Labour Party and Donald Trump intensified as the fallout from Angela Rayner's comments continued to unfold. As the economic impact of Trump's retaliatory tariffs began to take effect, the Labour Party found itself under intense pressure to address the situation. Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, was faced with a difficult dilemma: either attempt to mend the fractured relationship with Trump and the United States, or risk further political and economic fallout. The stakes were high, as maintaining a strong relationship with the US was essential for the UK, particularly in terms of trade and international diplomacy. However, Starmer also had to consider the growing discontent within his own party, which was increasingly troubled by the mixed messages and inconsistency in leadership. Starmer's initial reaction was to downplay the seriousness of the situation, insisting that the Labour Party's commitment to strong diplomatic relations with the US remained intact despite the recent tensions. However, the damage had already been done, and the Labour Party now found itself struggling to navigate a complicated diplomatic landscape. The tariffs, which were already having a tangible economic impact, only added further complexity to the UK's international standing. Many British citizens, especially those working in industries directly affected by the tariffs, began to question whether Labour could effectively manage the UK's relationship with global powers like the US. As tariffs increased costs in key sectors like manufacturing, prices for everyday goods began to rise, alienating the working-class voters who had traditionally supported Labour. These voters, now burdened with higher costs, felt increasingly disillusioned by the party's failure to protect their interests. Furthermore, Starmer's efforts to balance political expediency and manage the fallout from Rayner's remarks appeared inconsistent. His public stance on Trump seemed contradictory, with Starmer attempting to strike a middle ground between maintaining diplomatic civility and criticizing Trump's policies. This lack of a clear and firm position, either in support of or in opposition to Trump, left many questioning his leadership and direction. The public soon saw that Starmer's strategy lacked coherence, and the Labour Party became vulnerable to accusations of indecisiveness. Worse, this indecision started to undermine Labour's credibility both domestically and internationally. The party's political gamesmanship, trying to play both sides of the Trump issue, was clearly backfiring. As the situation continued to develop, it became evident that the Labour Party's handling of the Trump issue had not only caused political embarrassment, but also severely damaged the party's reputation. The UK was now paying the price for political mismanagement, where personal grievances and diplomatic inconsistencies were overshadowing the Labour Party's ability to advocate for the interests of the British public. The stakes were higher than ever, and the pressure on Starmer to stabilise the situation and regain the public's trust was mounting. As the Labour Party grappled with the fallout from its internal missteps, it became clear that its credibility was at risk, both in the eyes of the public and on the global stage. As the Labour Party struggled to manage the fallout from Donald Trump's criticisms, its internal contradictions and inconsistencies became increasingly apparent. Keir Starmer's leadership was under intense scrutiny, not just from political rivals, but also from within his own party. The core issue was the Labour Party's mixed messaging on the Trump administration, which caused confusion both in the UK and internationally. Starmer had initially presented himself as a leader capable of engaging with the United States while upholding Labour's principles. However, his actions increasingly appeared inconsistent. On one hand, he emphasized the importance of maintaining strong diplomatic ties with the US, particularly in defense and intelligence matters. On the other, he allowed critical remarks about Trump, especially from figures like Rayner, to continue unchecked, which only served to undermine Labour's credibility on the global stage. This inconsistency placed Starmer in a difficult position. His public support for diplomatic relations with Trump clashed with the critical rhetoric coming from his own party. The situation worsened after Rayner's inflammatory comments, which led to a diplomatic row and triggered retaliatory tariffs. Labour's position seemed incoherent, as it tried to maintain a cordial relationship with a powerful global leader while also appeasing its base, which was critical of Trump's policies. This dual approach became a glaring example of political expediency, as the party appeared to avoid taking a firm, consistent stance. The lack of clarity left many questioning whether Labour had the strength or resolve to represent Britain effectively on the world stage. Domestically, the fallout was just as damaging. Labour's credibility with voters, especially working-class communities that had traditionally supported the party, began to erode. The tariffs imposed by Trump were no longer an abstract diplomatic issue. They had real, tangible consequences for British families. Key industries like steel and aluminium, which were already under pressure, now faced even greater economic strain. Workers' livelihoods were threatened, but instead of standing up for them, the Labour Party seemed preoccupied with internal political struggles, offering little to address their immediate concerns. The lack of a clear and consistent response to the economic impact of the tariffs further alienated Labour from its base, leaving voters frustrated and disillusioned, particularly those already struggling with rising living costs. In this context, Labour's internal divisions over handling the Trump issue symbolized larger, systemic problems within the party. The contradictions in its approach to international diplomacy reflected a lack of coherence in its domestic policies. The party's inability to present a unified, clear message not only weakened its position in US-UK relations, but also damaged its ability to lead effectively during times of economic uncertainty. Starmer's leadership, once seen as a fresh direction for the party, now appeared indecisive and politically weak, with Labour's credibility hanging in the balance. The internal confusion and growing public frustration painted a bleak future for the party, struggling to navigate an increasingly complex political landscape. The fallout from Rayner's comments about Donald Trump quickly escalated, intensifying the crisis for the UK Labour Party. Trump's retaliatory tariffs hit the UK economy hard, especially the steel and aluminium industries, which are vital to manufacturing and exports. These tariffs led to higher production costs and increased the price of goods, which in turn raised inflation and the cost of living for families already struggling. The UK's manufacturing sector, already vulnerable post-Brexit, faced job insecurity and stagnant wages. For Labour, the tariffs highlighted the risks of diplomatic missteps. Despite attempts to downplay Rayner's comments, the economic consequences were impossible to ignore. As costs rose and inflation continued, Labour found itself unable to offer clear solutions, and its mixed messages on handling the Trump issue worsened the situation. The party was caught between internal divisions and pressure from voters who were feeling the strain. The tariffs also became a political issue. The UK's need to rebuild relations with the US clashed with Labour's internal battles, leaving Starmer under intense pressure. The damage to the UK's international standing was clear, and the diplomatic fallout from Rayner's remarks was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Ultimately, the economic and diplomatic repercussions left the Labour Party struggling to regain public trust. Starmer's leadership was questioned as the party's inability to manage the situation effectively exacerbated public frustration. The handling of the Trump issue would have lasting consequences for Labour's credibility and ability to navigate future political and economic challenges. Rayner's comments about Donald Trump sparks not only immediate diplomatic tensions, but also a severe crisis for the Labour Party's credibility. As Trump's tariffs on key UK industries began to take effect, the economic impact became undeniable. The rising production costs in critical sectors like steel and aluminium put a heavy strain on businesses and workers, especially in manufacturing. For Labour, This was a stark reminder of the far-reaching consequences of political missteps. Keir Starmer was now caught in a difficult position, trying to repair the damaged relationship with the US while also addressing the economic fallout of the tariffs on British citizens. The party's inability to offer a decisive response to the crisis exacerbated the frustration among voters. As costs continued to rise and job insecurity spread, it became apparent that Labour's leadership had mishandled the situation. Mixed messages and a lack of clarity on how to deal with the economic impact left the public questioning the party's capability to govern effectively. The failure to protect British workers from the economic consequences of the tariffs further weakened Labour's position. As the UK faced rising inflation and uncertainty, the challenges grew for Starmer. His leadership, marked by inconsistency, struggled to provide the necessary direction during this turbulent time, leaving the Labour Party vulnerable and uncertain about its future role in addressing both domestic and international challenges. See you later.